Escambia County or Santa Rosa County tried the approach seen in the movie in any of the schools?
I have been involved with Escambia County and Santa Rosa County School District as an applied researcher since 1980. Santa Rosa County, many years ago, in the late 80s, early 90s, with money from the administration of Governor Lawton Childs, established what's called a full-service school at Hollymar Middle School. The school was physically designed to have office space for law enforcement, HRS, which is now DCF, protective services, but also economic support services for parents. It was basically a school that was open from 7 in the morning till 9 at night. It's located in the community. It was designed with doors where people coming for economic services would not come in contact with kids because of security reasons. These number of years later, that's morphed into what's called an integrated services team approach in all Santa Rosa County schools, where when a child presents a problem, you have relevant people from, if law enforcement is needed, they're there, certainly medical, public health, mental health, all the various service agencies out there. Escambia County, right now at C.A. Weiss Elementary School, has established a community schools program, which looks and sounds a lot like that. And I'm looking at my colleague here who probably would like to talk more about that community school.
At C.A. Weiss, Escambia County School District is collaborating with Children's Home Society, and they are doing the community mental health approach where they're going to provide counseling services for students and their families there on campus so that it's more convenient for the families to be able to. It's difficult for transportation for them to get downtown in those appointments, so thinking that it's close within the community that they will be able to utilize those services better. We are also, within some of the schools, we are training trauma-informed care, which talks about students who have the ACEs, excuse me. So we are starting to train that, and we recognize that students who sometimes are acting out, it's because of the experiences that they've received, and it isn't necessarily because they are just bad kids or unmotivated and so forth. So we are moving in that direction.
One additional plug is we saw what happens with kids at that end of the age span in schools. When I first was invited to do this, I did some research. It's easier if you start at the other end. And I will make an unashamed pitch for an organization with whom I work. It's called eCare, Every Child a Reader in Escambia. And some of the kids with whom this organization works are as young as 4 years old. And there are a number of components for that program. One is Reading Pals, and I'm looking around the room. I was just volunteered to become a Reading Pal by someone who helps manage my affairs. and I know there's a Reading Pal who helped organize this event. All of you are potential Reading Pals. I know I saw the chief at a readathon at an elementary school, so I know that's something that's big. So, Ashley, will you stand up? Ashley Bomer is Executive Director of eCare, and we have a meeting in the morning, but go to the website and volunteer. It also has a family night where parents come into the school and they're taught literacy skills to teach their kids. They're taught how to read aloud, do lap sits, a lot of those issues. So starting at the other end is probably the best prevention.
We have partnered with them. And through our Early Childhood and Career Academy, we have partnered with eCare. We did our first event. This fall, and eCare, we partnered with our elementary school right next door, Myrtle Grove, and our high school students sponsored their literacy event. So eCare came and we wanted to give every family a book. They helped provide the books. Our students put on all the centers. Our students that are learning to become elementary teachers they actually put on all the different events and help with the face painting and the reading and so forth. So we're one of the last high schools that I feel can become a community school, because we're right in the middle of a neighborhood, and so many schools are on a street that is not involved with the neighborhood. And so we are in the middle of a neighborhood where we can walk across the street and see students from the trailer park right across the street and read to students in Myrtle Grove. So we're trying to build on that to make a connection with our community.
I want to say something. I am not on the panel. I'm a classroom teacher at a Title I school. And I want to can I share something with you? It's not scripted, but I came here to learn and to please share. Can I read this? I wrote it about my kids. May I do that? This is their
Yes,
story.
can you step up to the front for
Sure.
us?
Thank you so much, because these are my kids' stories. Because after reading about the benefits of gratitude, I invited my 7th grade students to join me in keeping daily gratitude journals.
His video.
Immediately upon entering class, students grabbed their journals and began writing about the 3 things they are grateful for that day. I do not grade the work, I just celebrate it. Last week, students wrote about the people they were grateful for. Volunteers shared their entries. The majority cited parents, siblings, and other family members. There were also a few surprises. One student wrote he was grateful his classmates correct his behavior. While we started to have a student-managed classroom, he may really just be grateful his classmates can't call his mama. Another student wrote, I am grateful Mrs. Wright never gives up on us or our futures. I thanked him for his priceless affirmation. And finally, I am grateful Mrs. Wright did not give up on herself or her job. A couple of years ago, I almost did just that. My students had less than stellar FCAT reading scores. However, I did not begin to doubt my value as their teacher until an administrator advised me that if I really loved my students, I would teach more of them to be better readers. I meditated on that all summer. The next school year began with a pep talk advising teachers we would be reassigned if our students' test scores did not improve. Soon my students' academic stumbles seemed more like omens than opportunities. And for the first time ever, their social and emotional needs were no longer front and center. After all, I would be judged by my students' test scores, not their happiness. Strangers with clipboards, dour faces, and critical pens popped in and out of my classroom. No matter what I did, the numbers continued to add up to not enough. I was angry, afraid, and frustrated. I was ready to quit, and my students had long left the building. What once had fed my soul was now ravenously feeding upon it. I stayed late in my classroom, my sanctuary, trying to figure out how to fix this mess. I cried, I prayed, hours passed, then came the epiphany. I was miserable because I was no longer being true to myself or fair to my students. I considered my career and realized it was filled with evidence of students' growth. I remember the boy who told me I had taught him how to be a strong black man. Of course, I did no such thing. I merely created an environment that allowed him to discover that possibility for himself. I remember the students who re-imaged themselves as poets. They put their pain and anger about parental drug abuse and domestic violence into beautiful, powerful, healing words. I wrote their story in a magazine article, and the poets were guests on a local talk show. I thought about students who openly said, I love you to one another, their countless group hugs, and the amazing safety of us. I thought about the girl who said I taught her life was worth living. The smart, artistic, talented young lady was being treated for severe emotional problems, including suicidal ideations. By the end of the school year, she still had not learned to make gains on FCAT reading, but she had somehow learned to appreciate the value of her life. The following morning, I wrote the word epiphany on the whiteboard. I explained its meaning and shared mine. I asked my students to forgive me for being more focused on teaching curriculum than on teaching children. And I promised them I would never use the word FCAT in our class again. Let me hold you to it. My students' emotional and social needs are again front and center in my classroom. Not too long ago, a student who has a well-documented history of behavior problem said he liked our class because I can breathe in here. I am hired to teach reading, and I try to do that to the best of my ability. Many of my students do demonstrate measurable growth in reading skills, and most learn to appreciate the importance of making meaning of text and to more effectively use their own words. I am confident that by the end of the school year, all of my students will make gains, and I accept the fact that some of those gains cannot be measured by standardized tests. Sometimes student growth looks like optimism, courage, confidence, and resilience. Often growth is learning their futures need not be tethered to statistics, labels, or other people's agendas. And most important of all, sometimes growth is learning to joyfully and purposely show up in this awesome thing called life. What happened is, because our evals are tied to students' test scores, largely they are, and that was frightening. When a kid wasn't doing well, I'm thinking, man, you messed with my money. But then I went to my room and I prayed and I said, God, if I am doing what you want me to do, then you take care of the numbers. I don't know if they're taking care or not, but I love my babies and they love me. They love themselves. Thank you.
Could you tell us your name one more time, please?
Elaine Wright, I teach at Bellevue Middle School.
Thank you. All right. The next question I have has, Escambia County jails see African American youth at 3 times the rate of all other racial groups. How can an ACEs theory be implemented to reduce this injustice?
That's a real easy question. Actually, it's not. ACEs says basically that what happens during prenatal period, fetal development, what happens during the first few days of life, what happens in early childhood time, actually can change how the brain's wired. I'm sitting here next to my colleague, a neuropsych person. And until we have figured out, and Debbie Goldberg's here, who's at Sacred Heart Hospital, works with early interventions and early assessments of kids, until we can start there and support the family, teach these young mothers, frequently the very youngest mothers, how to take care of themselves. One of my wonderful colleagues, and we talked about this before, Erica Jordan, looked at preconception health of young women. Preconception health is where you start. But if it's not grabbed then, as you move up, programs like we saw here, where you help kids literally rewire through intentional work, how you use language. I wrote some quotes down, things that I heard kids say. I'm managing to do well. I'm managing to do well. I did it. That's taking responsibility and control. 2 things with these early toxic stressors that happens in the brain is the part of the brain that does manage that doesn't get wired exactly right the way it is right, because they survive, they live, they do everything they can. It's just different than what I was taught. And there are ways to deal with that. But I'm going to pass the mic to Jim to talk about the brain.
What you may not know is I'm a neuropsychologist, in addition to being the chair of the Department of Psychology. One of the things I wanted to mention when I was watching the film and I was watching some of the young people, a lot of people don't know that the adolescent brain isn't fully developed. And so this should come as no surprise to you if you're a parent, if you're an educator, that there's at least one area of the brain that's not functioning quite well. And that's the frontal lobe. It's a higher order area of the brain here located And the importance of that frontal lobe is that it helps individuals to make informed decisions. It also helps to inhibit behaviors that are controlled by much lower brain structures, things that are very motivational, including sex, fear, violence, and things like that. And so what you see in a teenager, what you saw in that video, what I have seen in my own children, who turned into aliens, by the way, for about a year or two, you're basically looking at an individual whose frontal lobe, a very important area of the brain that does develop by the age of 25, by the age of, it's the last area of the brain to develop, that lower areas of the brain until that time run wild. And it's during that period of between, say, 13 years old and 25 years old, and we know this because we can see the behaviors, that the frontal lobe in somebody who's developing properly slowly starts to take control. And the behavior seems to become a little bit more rational. And they're less impulsive. They're less emotional. They don't act out. But there are a lot of things that can go wrong with that sort of development. And so things like early trauma, things like early stress, because of neurochemicals, can actually weaken that connection. So a frontal lobe that's not completely developed, that's trying very hard through development to exert control over some of those lower brain structures, under the best conditions, we'll do it by the age of 25. But if things happen like stressful events, things like traumatic events, it can interfere with that development. And the problem there is that if that frontal lobe, if that higher part of the brain doesn't exert the control that it needs to by a certain period of time, it makes it really hard later on to control behavior. The types of behavior that gets kids into trouble. And just to give you just one quick example of this, it's something that all of you have experienced. If you've ever had to give a public talk and you've ever been stressed, one of the first things that happens is those lower brain structures disconnect the frontal lobe. And that's one of the reasons why you find it so hard to talk. And the point I'm making is these kids without functioning frontal lobes, without the appropriate connections, and they may not be appropriate given drugs, not given the appropriate environment, they're going to find themselves as adults in a lot of situations where they don't have quite the control that we all do. And so when you look at a teenager, know that not all the brain is being used, especially that part of the brain that exerts control over some of those kind of base motivations. It will if given the appropriate environment. But as you saw in the video here, given all the challenges, that can be very difficult. And it's not to say that with time that can't happen. But individuals such as that have to be given opportunities, environments in which they can succeed. You have to give that frontal lobe the opportunity to exert control and succeed. The connections form, they strengthen, things get better.
All right, next I'm going to put Chief Alexander on the spot. Okay. The interface with law enforcement is a significant factor in all of this. What are you and your team doing about all of that? If you could come up front for us.
Do I have to put a number on the chin? Let me try to answer this briefly. Oh, in front of the gun. Get in front of the gun over there. Oh, you. Okay, let me try to briefly answer this. We have recently discovered some research done through Harvard University that talks about the implications of trauma and the challenges for law enforcement. There's another movie that I hope you all will be interested in watching. It's called Healing Need. It's a story by a lady named Tanya Kane. And her early childhood experience led to 93 arrests and 66 convictions. And it's a documentary that I really think you need to see, because it'll explain to you, if we don't embrace this and start at the early age, then we're dealing with it, not going to. we're dealing with the results of it not happening. And so systems that traditionally have not worked together have got to work together. So intentional policing strategies for me means that our officers are intentionally engaging with the community to make sure that our intentions are genuine as to why we're here. There are two perspectives. We can come there as a police meaning to maintain and gain control. We can come as a peace officer, which means there are more non-enforcement type capacities, giving information, getting information. So we're doing a lot of things differently, and we're incorporating the training of a trauma-informed care in our strategies. And it's something that the Department of Justice they're recommending it nationwide. So we're still going through a transition at the police department, but you got to realize I got a lot of 22 and 23-year-old officers. And so, but my challenge is not with them. Because once they trust me, we can get a lot of things done. We have an officer that went to handle a call where kids were playing basketball in the street and one of the neighbors had complained. So the officer knew that he had to tell them they had to stop. But how he chose to do this made the world of difference. So he went over, and he likes basketball. So one of his backup officers caught a picture of him. He was down in the defensive stance, and it really went over well with the kids. They complied because they understood he had a job to do. He understood they wanted to play basketball, and there really wasn't nothing wrong with that, but at the same time we had a complaint that came from a citizen. And so he left with compliance from the young guys. I think they're 10, 11 years old. But that's just an example of how it's how you handle it. We often say it's not what you said, but it's how you said it. So my challenge is not the young officers. My challenge is the ones that have been around so long and they already know it all. In other words, the concrete has already dried. But what we do have to do is we have to exercise a little more patience, even on these calls. As a matter of fact, I got to leave here and to talk to a young man that his one adverse childhood experience was that his father left him, and his father wants nothing to do with him. And he's acting out in school. He's just been suspended for the second time, and his mom is raising him and his younger brother, and so there's a lot of violent behaviors that are. And see, I have to work from a different perspective because he's always going to see me in the uniform. But what I'm trying to get him to realize that the consequences of behavior and how things keep spiraling out of control, I can't threaten him with jail. And that's the thing about horror movies and things like that. It makes kids numb to the realities of getting in trouble or taking these unreasonable risks. So you can't threaten them, but you got to work with them. You got to work them through it. So that's why I think that this is very important, and certainly I hope that we will go beyond just talking about it and find some things to put into action. So that's what we're doing at the police department, and I think you're going to see a lot more agencies nationwide that probably have a lot more severe problems than ours here in Northwest Florida. I hope that answers it. Healing Neen, N-E-E-N. It's her nickname? N-E-E-N. I do have a copy. Yes, you can watch it. It's about 50 minutes. But I think it's something that community-wise, it'd be a nice community awareness video that if we can get together like this again, I'd be happy to share mine. Like I said, if you want to, you can go online and look at it. It's very informative, and she shows you how all the different systems that I'm talking about actually failed her. And one day somebody said something to her, really caring for her, and it was just that one statement that really turned everything around for her. And so now she travels worldwide speaking to women in prisons, health professions, caregivers, and the likes. So it's very enlightening, and I hope if you don't want to come to a community setting and do it, at least pull it up online and look at it for yourself.
Thank you. Thank you, Chief Alexander. All right, next up. Why do we we keep reinventing the wheel? For the educators in the room, is there anything new in this video? We know all of this. The real question is, how do we get the county to circumvent the politics and allow teachers to do what they already know is the answer? Why not start with helping those downtown remember what it's like to be in the classroom and make them re-experience?
I think, I'm not an educator, but I think we're all here and we know, the unfortunate reality or the answer to that. And it's about putting pressure on the people who we've elected to do those jobs and demanding that and I should have said, I'm sorry, but demanding that they look holistically at our children and that they make the changes that we need to make. They're in those positions for a reason. And we can't allow this trauma and these issues to continue to impact our children without going in and saying we have to address this. We need to make sure that they're fed. We don't know the struggles that they're coming in these classrooms with and that they're facing every day. We can't expect them to want to sit down and read when they've experienced something happening with mom the night before, or they didn't get to sleep till 2 or 3 in the morning. So we have to be able to apply pressure and say this is what needs to happen. And I think it's just that simple.
And while you have the microphone, what is the role of social work in the schools when it comes to all of this?
What is the role?
Your role, yes.
Social workers should be, they're essential to this. And I forget your name. Lisa Joyner, she manages the social workers and other programs that provide those services. But social workers are essential in this. We are looking at the total experience. So we're not just looking at the child, we're looking at the family environment. We're looking at all of these factors, the system, and how all of these things interface and play out. So we're concerned with whether or not this child has food to eat. Do they have clothing? If a family member's in jail or they've had to deal with trauma, how do we help them process this? So it's not just about the resources and making sure that they show up, but it's about making sure that when they show up, that they're able to sit in the chair. They have food, they're warm, they're comfortable, and that they can engage and that they can learn. So that's the role of the social worker in all of this.
Next question. This was a very white film, although there were Hispanics and Asian students. How do you think the insights apply to our community, which has very different profiles?
Can I answer that one too? The interesting thing about the ACE is that it was actually discovered using affluent families, because you're talking about insurance families and Kaiser Permanente. But if you only need a 4 to have an ACE score, I think that it's very applicable to our community. There are 10 risks, and I don't have them, but you can Google them and pull them up. Even this past semester, I had a student at UWF that did a survey, and she was looking at domestic violence perceptions and the ability of students in helping professions to work with batterers. So this is not just social work, but psychology, nursing, pre-medicine, just any of those disciplines. And she was surprised when she put the ACE survey in there and started looking at the number of college students that were in helping disciplines that had high ACE scores. So we have to deal with our own resolved trauma to be effective helpers. So this is not just social work. You're talking your nurses. How can you provide care? So it's very applicable across the board in our community. It doesn't matter that the people in the film didn't look like our community. Those 4 ACE factors that you need, they hit our community. Jail, having a parent be abused, being molested, drugs, they're here. They're here. It doesn't matter.
I actually have a question for the teachers in the room. I noticed in the film, when I was watching it, they had at least one instructor who seemed to be providing the students with a basic understanding of biology, the physiology associated with what they were going through. And it struck me, and he was correct, he did a great job at describing it at a level that they could understand. But it strikes me that providing students, providing young people with that sort of information might help them to understand what it is they're going through. And so we all know this, it can be very confusing, but there's something about knowing the mechanism And whether it be them or us in terms of a health issue, understanding the process, the mechanism, can help the individual to gain control, to then modify one's behavior, and to just feel perhaps normal instead of abnormal, which is, I think, what I heard over and over again. And I guess what I'm wondering is that going on here?
I've been doing student
Microphone.
Microphone.
I've been doing, working, I'm gonna, in my retired life, become a teacher. And I've been doing teaching in a, I guess Camelot school, kind of school, but not Camelot. And what I noticed, the first thing is the list of things that can get you expelled. Is the first thing you see when you walk into an alternative school. Of course, we know that that doesn't help. What I did with the students was the Dr. Dan Siegel hand model of your brain and how your brain works. And then I've been doing mindfulness experiences with the students, and that helps. It's slow. It's weird. I'm the weird person. I'm the lady that brings all the lotion and squeezy stuff. But that does seem like it helps students, and so that we don't have to wait. Even though we wish we could start when they're little, we can't. We have to start with who we have. And there are real practical, everyday, known things that help students learn to get control of their body, learn to I'm a member of an online group called ACES Connection. If you don't know about it, you should join it if you're interested. It's educators, it's religious people, it's everybody, police, trauma-informed practices and care. And we say, instead of asking people, what's wrong with you, asking students what's wrong with you, we're asking them, what happened to you? And once they start to realize we're behaving based on what happened to us. And we can get better, because I don't know if you know your ACE score, but I do know my ACE score. And I know my ACE score puts me dying 20 years before people who had less ACEs than me. And I know that I have to practice mindfulness because I had to overcome certain early childhood and teenage problems. So those things can really help students. There are practical things we can do, and I definitely recommend ACE Connection if you're interested, and reading Dr. Dan Siegel, and mindfulness and meditation. And I don't mean it from a religious point of view, because, you know, it's not religious. It's getting in touch with what's going on in your own body. So.
What was your name again?
Donna Woodard.
Donna Woodard. We have someone back here too. Could you come up to the front?
I'm going to address you not only as a teacher, but as a mother of a child that I adopted at a later age. Of course, when I adopted her, I was told that enough love would fix everything. And of course, we know a little better than that now. I would have been better prepared to have been told what to expect. But I do know one thing, and that is that when this child of mine, whose normality was chaos, tried to live what we consider to be a normal life, she would always crave to return to the chaos again. And this followed her into her adult life, where she would be a mother and a wife for a period of time, for as long as she could stand it, and then she'd go off and leave her family and become an exotic dancer for a while, and then return to normalcy, what we consider to be normalcy again. I considered myself a failure. And I thought that I was doing all the wrong things. I must be a terrible mother if I haven't been able to love this child enough to correct everything about her that needed to be corrected. And then I started to do what you said. I started to sit down with her and tell her, this is what you're going through. This is what your life was like beforehand. Everything that you're doing now is what we can expect. Do not feel weird about this. Embrace it. And you know what? Rome wasn't created in a day. We'll take a step at a time. Debbie is 42 years old right now. She is not leaving home to become an exotic dancer, although she'll tell you it's because she doesn't have the body she had. Nonetheless, when I try to apply this to my classroom, I don't have all the kids that need to coming up to me like my daughter's saying, and saying, what's the matter with me? Why can't I be the way I know I should be? They're afraid to do that in the limited time that we have. And when I say limited time, I don't mean classroom time. I mean the amount of time that they're absent. I mean the amount of time that they're pulled out of class left and right for an activity or a test after test after test after test, even though we've had somebody stand up in front of us from downtown and say they're being tested too much. Now we're just calling them assessments, but it's the same amount. And I think they're hoping that the parents don't realize that an assessment is a test. They're not, the consistency in the classroom is not there anymore. And that's the time that you need to build that relationship with the child so that that child can come to you and say, what's the matter with me and why am I like this? So you can sit down with them and actually say, you're fine, let me explain this out to you.
Jerry Springer would have carried the mic to you.
Well, I just wanted to introduce myself. I know a lot of people in the room, but I don't know everyone. My name is Ava Shirato, and I am the project manager for a state-funded grant called SEDNet. And 90% of my responsibility is to provide trauma-informed care training to schools throughout Northwest Florida. I currently serve Escambia, Okaloosa, Walton, and Santa Rosa. Did I leave Santa Rosa? I'm sorry. I try to say it in order because I moved here from Texas, and I'm like, oh, we don't have those same counties. I get confused. But I didn't want to not speak, and especially on behalf of the school system, and let you know that the resources are available to the schools to get the training. The entire student services department has already been trained, and I don't know why I'm nervous. I talk all the time. But the way it works, in all reality, is that a principal has to request the training. And so 17 schools so far in just 1 year, in Escambia specifically, they have received the trauma-informed care training for the entire staff. Some campuses even included their cafeteria staff, which I thought was pretty phenomenal. Why that number is so low, which I'm glad it's better than 0, but 17 is not as significant as we like, is because the training really is about 3 to 4 hours, preferably 8, but you know that's highly unlikely in a school schedule. But because it requires teachers to be out of class to participate, and there are a lot of restrictions with the union, principals have difficulties reserving that type of time or asking teachers to literally volunteer that type of time without getting into contractual issues. So we're kind of limited to staff development days, which are typically used to focus on academics, I mean, just to be honest. So to have an opportunity to speak of something else is quite a bit of a challenge. But I would certainly encourage you as parents, as advocates, as community members to say, you know what, I would like to see my child school trained, or my grandchild's school trained, or just etc. My neighbor's kids go to this school, and I would really like to see them trained, and maybe we can get more schools to participate that way. But also, I'm burning up. We also do have some of the resources that have been mentioned tonight. My office is at the Hall Center. I have several copies of the documentary. If anybody would like to come by and get it, check it out, please bring it back because I have 4 counties. But lots of information on trauma-informed care, copies of the A-score, all those things are here. So I'm very proud to have been here for a year, and we're working on it. Teacher at Bellevue, your school is scheduled for trauma-informed care January 5th.
Yes,
Just so you know, just so you know.
I do know, and one more
Okay.
thing too, I first learned about the impact of trauma on the brain
Yeah.
through that book called Teaching with Poverty in Mind.
Absolutely.
I was so impressed
Yes.
with that book that I bought one from Mr. Thomas, but he took the book and paid me back, make sure it's
Okay.
clear. For Mr. Marcanio, for Mrs. Gobowski, for my
Yeah.
principal and my assistant principal.
Yes.
I paid for that with my own money. So there are a lot of teachers who do care. There are a lot of teachers who are getting the training.
Yeah.
So do not think that we're restricted by
Yeah.
contractual agreements or whatever. We do that on our own, okay?
Yeah, a lot of you do it
Yes,
on
we
your
do.
own. But just for the campus-wide, sometimes it's difficult. And I have copies of that book too, if anybody would like to.
It's an amazing
Don't
book.
buy it next time. Call me up and let me give it to you. So, I just want to say that.
What's your phone number?
It is.
And how do you spell your name?
Okay, Avis, like the Carmel place. Last name Schirato, SCHIRATO. And I'm office at the Hall Center on Tahar. And the phone number comes directly to me. It's 850-430-7473. You're very welcome.
Thank you. We're going to do a couple more questions and then try and get y'all out of here where it's a little bit cooler. All right, the next one says, the film said, to believe their behavior is out of their control is a bitter pill for educators to swallow. How are we getting leadership to swallow it? And how are we getting leadership to stop suspension? Ready?
I'll back up against the wall. Their behavior is under their control if they have the skills, if they have the strategies. Spent a lot of time some of us in the room look like we might have enough miles on our tires to remember a place called the Beggs Educational Center out between the tech center and the landfill, all portables. We had a classroom and we didn't accept that the kids couldn't control their behavior. What we accepted is the kids didn't have the strategies for managing, as Jim suggested, that this developing prefrontal cortex wasn't there yet, and what was there had been wired to a point where they felt helpless. The world hit them. And one of the things that I saw here is, again, a managing to do well. Once you get them to move from the pronoun you and they to I, that matters. Simple strategy. We would have them write an essay, and we would ask them to evaluate it. Typically, they gave it a failing grade. We said, why don't you give yourself a failing grade? It could be better. Nobody had ever given them the strategies to analyze. And then they would say, thank you for the grade. No. It's not me that got that grade. It's you. You know what? That works with college students. It works with graduate students. I'm looking at my colleagues from the University of West Florida, and if they get an A, they'll say, thank you for giving me an A. That's helplessness. Imagine if that's how you lived your life, where there was no apparent reason, there was no structure, no predictability in your environment. How are you going to judge your own behavior? So I'm looking at the teachers, because you know what that is. And you create a predictable structure. And I wrote a word down. The last word I wrote down is trust. You have to build trust. And that's what takes time at Bellevue. That's what takes time at all the other schools at Escambia. If the kids don't trust you, give it up. It's got to be structured. So changing the pronoun giving strategies, they can control their behavior. They just have never been taught how to.
I'll just add one thing. Always keep in mind, you're not looking, when you look at an adolescent, you're not looking at an individual with a broken brain. It's a developing brain. And so what you see is the brain trying to develop the skills, the frontal lobe trying to develop the skills. But it's not always going to be successful. And so there's trial, there's error. It's frustrating for parents, it's very frustrating for educators, there's no doubt about it. But that individual is developing. I think the real key is to provide the environment, the best environment that you can, to allow that frontal lobe, that part of the brain, to develop, to gain control over other areas of the brain, which generally result in very important behaviors, but behaviors that really should be omitted at the appropriate time. And that's generally not what you see with teenagers. So it's a very normal process. They are in control. In fact, the frontal lobe, the parts of the brain that are really important at that point, are trying to exert control. That's the whole point of development. And so they are responsible to a certain degree. It's a very natural process. Again, it's just the environment that has to be really what it should be. Drugs, things like that, a lot of anxiety, stressors, a broken family home can be a very difficult thing and an extra challenge that maybe other children don't have, but they're all developing. The frontal lobe, the brain is trying to do the best it can to develop as well as it can.
Okay. Oh, should I do that? Okay. There's a couple of things, and Dr. Joyner can add to what I forget that we're doing as a district, and then I can also speak to what we're doing at Escambia High School. First of all, as a district, the district has brought in a lot of training with a program that's called Capturing Kids' Hearts, teaching teachers those basic steps with ACEs and how to build those relationships with students and do that in the classrooms. We've done it in elementary schools, middle schools, and now it's filtering up to the high schools. We've sent a team, and we have a team that comes and trains with our school. We also have a matrix of services where a lot of schools are implementing a positive behavior support system. Alessandra works with us at Escambia High School, where we've built that program and teaching kids, again, if the behaviors that we want to see, we have to model that and we have to teach that. Just like we teach 2 + 2 is 4, we have to teach this is how we handle situations that are challenging for us, how we can go through and solve that. So rewarding students, allowing them to be rewarded, and then also teaching them how to modify the choices that they're making. And so how we have specifically implemented it here at Escambia High School is we provided our teachers, especially this year, with a matrix of student services and flow chart. This is how we're going to handle things with attendance, this is how we're going to handle academic challenges, and this is how we're going to handle behavioral challenges. And we start with this step where we're going to call the parent first. We're not going to call the dean, we're not going to call the SRO. Of course, there are certain situations that might merit that, but we're going to start with this. And then we're going to start with the tracking form. We provide a list of interventions, and then we build upon that. And then we go ahead and look at those interventions, and then we come back as a school and say, okay, where are we having successes? Where are we having areas of challenge? And how are we going to overcome those barriers? And so we have even seen our referrals drop drastically at Escambia High School this year. We're doing very, very well. So I have the number, how many, I don't know if but we're doing very, very well. Yeah. Yeah. Did I say everything?
I've got one more, and it's, as an education major, you learn about the psychology of a child and how it affects the classroom. When will the Escambia County School District start implementing the training that is taught in college courses?
I'm retired as a teacher, so I can say this. As soon as those things are taught explicitly in teacher education courses, as soon as they're taught explicitly in educational administration and leadership courses, and as soon as our students get out there in student teaching and can apply those under supervision and guidance. That's how we're going to do it.
I actually came into education because I wanted to be an educator, so I actually got a degree in education, which I did, which I guess is debatable, whether you should do that or not. For me, it was a valuable experience because I got those courses and I got training. I even had, when I had teaching history, my history professor would have the abominable snowman, and when it was my day to teach, he would have all the other students the week before go to the snowman and pull out behaviors, and they would act them out while I was teaching. And a huge part of the grade was, did I catch them and how did I correct them? So I actually, when we learned those things in Teachers College, and then from growing up in a home in poverty, and then knowing how to address that and working in the Pensacola community and a lot of inner city communities, you learn these skills. I always use the program in the classroom from Dr. Howard Knopf, the Stop and Think program, is what I'd like to use in my classroom. So when a student, you have to learn to spot, first of all, you have to be willing to have the conversation that there's an issue and accept that with the student, that there are challenges, and then you have to know how to reach those challenges. So when a student was making a choice, that's how I always talked about it. I never talked about it being bad behavior or good behavior. We were all making choices. So a student was making a choice, and I would say, okay, I need you to stop and think because of this. Are we making a good choice or a bad choice? Now, you can continue to do what you're doing, and I'm going to tell you what's going to happen. Or we can make a change, and I would do this. And this is what's the hard part oftentimes for teachers to do, then I would walk away. And I need to let them think. I use other language with my students. I say, let it marinate, okay? Think. And most of the time, they would change the behavior. So there's those strategies and things that I've learned as an educator that I've used in schools.
Thank you all.
I have one question. I actually called this school, Lincoln, today and talked to people at the school in the district, and I looked them up on the website. I have one question. I'd like to see what your estimates are. How much does it cost per pupil per year to educate a kid at Lincoln?
Well, you look at the student-teacher ratio in those classes, they're next to nothing.
Give me a dollar figure. What do you think it is?
9,400.
$11,383 per pupil per year. I don't know. It's not that.
Bruce?
Let me temper that a little bit. It only costs.
Turn around.
Okay. Let me introduce myself first then. I've been chomping at the bit over there anyway. I'm Bruce Watson. I'm the Executive Director of the Early Learning Coalition here. One of the adjuncts and supporters for eCare, among many others. We gave away 17,000 books last year, by the way. eCare was just one of many agencies that benefit from that effort. What you were talking about, on average, to put a child in an 8 to 10 hour a day quality child care scenario or setting is only $4,000 a year. So pay me now or pay me later. Okay. I would also like to add, there is other hope on the horizon. You don't see too many business people in this room today, and that's not by design, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. With very few exceptions, one of which is my good friend Pete Nowak over here, and others. And however, I'm happy to say that some of the most prominent businesses in our community are on the verge of initiating a major effort to try to help all of us put our arms around our children and help make this a better, and help focus their efforts and their time, their money, and their energies into being more effective with their donations, with what they're going to put back into our school systems and what we're going to put back into our children. Unfortunately, they're just getting off the ground, so I'm not really at liberty to try to, to reveal exactly what they're doing. The other initiative that I really would like to promote is this community, I think, is on the cusp and demands that we put a Children's Services Council together, and that we actually use our money, our time, our attention to take care of our children from birth to 18. That the 8 counties in this state that have done this already, they have seen the numbers that we saw in the video today, because they did not only, that health center in Walla Walla probably came from derivatives of something that we could do with the Children's Services Council here. And I'm part of an educational effort because of my position, I can't lobby. We need to get our county commissioners to vote to do this, and then turn around and put our time and effort and resources and a little bit of our property tax money, and we can literally take millions of dollars, double and triple it through other grants and other opportunities, and make a difference in our children's lives.
Okay, one more person. I love the enthusiasm.
Hi, my name is Dr. Eurydice Stanley, and since there are so many teachers here, I just wanted to say hello, and I also wanted to say that I am a retired lieutenant colonel in the Army, and not for applause, I'm just saying, one of my former tasks was to serve at a place called the Defense Equal Opportunity Management Institute. Has anyone heard of that institute? Okay, 2 people. Okay. So did you know that the Department of Defense has a residential facility where service members go to become aware of their personal biases? And the reason that they have this is because these service members are then sent out to serve as equal opportunity advisors. So they have to be aware of their personal biases so that they can help people when they come with issues of sexism, racism, sexual assault, sexual harassment. And all I am suggesting is that a lot of times there are things in our blind spot that we are not aware of. There are so many studies that say one teacher could look at 2 students and see different things. My phone just died, and I'd show you a study I just pulled up. It came out, I think it was, but it was August 15th, and I just pulled it up, but my phone died. So, and I'm saying 2 students with their brains at the same level of psychosis, but she could end up in jail, and he could get a really good talking to. And here in Escambia County, she goes to jail a lot. And he gets a really good talking to. I am not from here. I'm from California, but my children have lived in 5 different states. My daughter's only 13. She just turned 13. My son is 10. And I cannot even imagine if I have to go to a prison to get my kids. Well, first of all, if that happens, you're all going to hear about it, and you don't want to. So just take that out of your mind. But not every parent can advocate for their children. We saw that in the movie. So you all are the front line of defense, just like I was the front line of defense for every one of those victims, because that's what you saw in this movie, victims. Those children, if you could see them as victims and not as aggressors, not as people who are trying to steal your power in the classroom, perhaps that could have a different outcome, because we don't just lead the state. I need you to understand that. We don't just lead the state, we lead the nation, okay? And this is not the area that we want to lead the nation in. So I just want to share that. The students were with me for 16 weeks, and I'm telling you, that wasn't enough. So it's incumbent upon all of us to take the time to see what button it is that can be pushed and what our personal ACEs score may be that pushes it, because that child has nothing to do with your personal experience from 50 years ago from Miss Mary Mack when you stole her doggone bicycle. That's all I would like to suggest. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we're wrapping up here, and first I want to thank our moderator, Teresa. Thank you very much. And next, I really want to thank our fantastic panel. And thirdly, this fantastic audience. Y'all are terrific. Drive safely. Good night.